Bruchim haboim, welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom, from the 2 dots. At the end of last time, the Gemara brought a brisa that according to Beis Shammai, it's osur to make shiduchim for tinokos. Similarly, it's osur to attain a teacher, to teach your child a trade, or to teach him even svarim. And Beis Shammai says, because after all, the pasuk in Yeshaya says, Mimtza cheftzecha, you're not allowed to pursue your own business, and therefore that's osur. Beis Hillel argues and says, no, Mimtza cheftzecha. Cheftzecha is osur, but cheftze shomayim, when it's a mitzvah, is mutter. Also, in regards to visiting the sick, or being menachem avelim, consoling the mourning, Beis Shammai says it's osur again, because Mimtza cheftzecha. However, Beis Hillel argues again and says that it's mutter because cheftzecha, your own business, but mitzvah, cheftze shomayim, is mutter. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon hanichnas levaker es hachoyle. The Gemara brings a brisa, a person who enters to visit the sick on Shabbos. Oimer Shabbos himaliz oik v'refua krovoy lovoy. Shabbos we refrain from screaming out in tefillah, and a refuah should come soon. Rabbi Meir oimer yechoyle hi sheterachem. Rabbi Meir says that a person should say to the sick person, by you keeping the Shabbos, that itself will then bring rachamim upon yourself. By being mechabed the Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda oimer hamokam yerachem alecha v'al chole Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda says, you say to the sick person, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu have rachamim upon you and all of the sick people. Rabbi Yosi oimer hamokim yerachem alecha b'toich choyle Yisrael. Rabbi Yosi says a slightly different way. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu have rachmanis upon you, b'toich, amongst all of those in Yisrael. In other words, he includes the choyle together with all of the other choylim in Yisrael. Shevna ish Yerushalayim b'knisasoi oimer shalom. Shevna was a tzaddik who lived in Yerushalayim, and when he would enter the room of the choyle, he would say shalom, and when he would leave, he would say the following: Mitziyasa oimer, Shabbos himalizoik u'refua korva lovoy. Shabbos, we are refraining from being able to scream out in tefillah, and a refuah should come quickly. V'rachamav merubin, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mercy is great. V'shiv soy b'shalom, and may you be shomer the Shabbos b'shalom. Keman azlo ha da Amar Rabbi Chanina, like who of the opinions that we just said goes like Rabbi Chanina. Misha yesh lo choyle b'toich beisoy, when a person has a choyle in his house, tzorich sheyarvenu b'toich chole Yisrael, he must include him amongst the other cholim of Yisrael. Keman, ke Rabbi Yosi. This indeed is like Rabbi Yosi, that said that when you give a bracha to the choyle, you should say hamokim yerachem alecha b'soich choyle Yisrael, to include the choyle together with other cholim in Yisrael. And that's indeed the way that we are noheg to do. When a person davens the refuah shlema for somebody, he says b'soich sha'ar cholei amo Yisrael. Says the Gemara, v'amar Rav Chanina b'koishi hitiu lenachem avelim ulevaker cholim b'Shabbos. Rav Chanina says, with difficulty were the sages permitting a person to menachem avelim and mevaker the cholim on Shabbos, because after all, it causes tsar to the one who is mevaker the choyle and the one who is then menachem the avelim. But because again it's a mitzvah and it can then cause consolation and also give hope to the one who is sick, therefore they permitted it. Omar Rabbe bar bar Chano, ki hava azlinon basrei de Rabbi Elozar l'shayule besficha, when he would go visit the sick, zimnin omar hamokom ifkodcha l'sholom. Sometimes he would say the words hamokom ifkodcha l'sholom in Lashon HaKodesh. V'zimnin omar rachmona yidkarinoch lishlom. And sometimes he would say the same bracha, but in Aramaic. Heichi Avid Hachi asked the Gemara, how did he say this bracha in Aramaic? Ve'amar Rav Yehuda la'olam al yishal adam tzrochav b'lashon arami. A person shall not say his needs and be mevakesh in lashon arami. Now, this is true when it comes to personal bakoshos, because bakoshos with the tzibur, one is allowed to then include the lashon aramis. But in the individual bakoshos, when he's not davening with the tzibur, then a person is not to then mevakesh tzrochav b'lashon arami. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan kol hashoyel tzrochav b'lashon arami ei malache hasharis nizkakin loy. If a person does use the words of aramit in his bakasha, then the malache hasharis will not be able to then nizkakin to help him. Meaning to say that when a person davens alone, he needs the help of the malachim to bring up his tfilos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whereas when he davens with the tzibur, goes directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore he's not to use the words of Aramit, of Aramaic. Why? Either because they don't understand Aramaic, because they consider it to be a shibush of Lashon HaKodesh. It's not the way, the pure way of Lashon HaKodesh, but rather it's mixed with words that are similar to Lashon HaKodesh, and therefore they don't understand Aramit. Some say they don't understand any language other than Lashon HaKodesh. Ba'al Kopanim, Rabbi Yochanan says they're not makir Lashon HaHarami. Says the Gemara, Shiny Choyle, the Shechina Imo. It's different to mevakesh for a Choyle because the Shechina is together with the Choyle. The Amar Rav Hanan, Amar Rav Minayin Shechina Soyed Es HaChoyle. Where do we know that the Shechina supports the ill person? Shenemar, it says in the Pasuk, Hashem Yisadenu al Eres Dvai. Hashem supports the ill mita, the ill bed, the one who is sick in bed. Now, why does it... Right. Tanya Nami Hochem, we also have a Braisa to support this. Hanichnas levakers hachoyle. Somebody who enters to visit the sick. Lo yeshev lo al gabe mita, v'lo al gabe kisei. Ele misatef v'yoshev lefonov. A person who visits the sick and wants to sit next to the ill person who's lying in bed, he shall not lie anywhere above where the head of the sick person is, and therefore he shouldn't sit on a mita that is higher than the mita of the ill person laying down, or not in a chair. Rather, he should misatif and enwrap himself and sit in front of him. Why? Out of ema, because the Shechina is above the head of the ill person. Shenemar says, Hashem Yisadenu al Eres Dvai. Now, why is it that the Shechina is above the head of a sick person? Does he just become a tzaddik because he's sick? What enables the choyle to have the Shechina rest above him more than any other person? So the answer is because the choyle, because of his illness, is now nichna. And due to his humility, HaKadosh Baruch Hu thereby is then resting above the humbled one. Says the Gemara, V'amar Rave, Amar Ravin, Minayin Shakadosh Baruch Hu zon es hachoyle. Where do we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sustains? He's zon the choyle. Sometimes a choyle doesn't eat and doesn't drink, sometimes for days. So how is he sustained? Says the Gemara, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sustains him. What do we know? Shenemar, it says in that pasuk, Hashem Yisadenu al Eres Devai. Now here the word soyed, supports, is also now used in a different sense of support. Hashem supports him, he sustains him. And therefore that's what we learn again from this pasuk of Hashem Yisadenu al Eres Devai. The Gemara now turns to the part of the Mishnah that says, Lo yikra la'or haner. A person on Shabbos shall not read next to the light of a ner. And we explain because the ner has within it oil and a wick. And very often the wick becomes, the light becomes dim because there's not enough oil that's being sucked into the wick. So a person often then tilts the ner in order to then give the wick more of the oil, more of the fuel, to allow the wick to then grab more of that oil and become then more illuminated. So therefore, if he would do that on Shabbos, he would be over an Isser Deraisa of Havara, and therefore the Chachamim made an Isser Derabanan not to be able to even read by a Ner, lest he come to then tilt the Ner and then be over the Isser Deraisa. Omar Rabba afilu gavoya shtei komois. Even if the Ner is high as a height of 2 floors, 2 stories. Va'afilu shtei mardois. And even if it is 2 things that are put on a donkey's back to heat up the donkey, which has each one is double the size of the height of a person. Va'afilu asara batim zu agav zu. And even 10 houses, this on top of the other. In other words, no matter how high the Ner is, nonetheless, a person is still prohibited from reading next to that Ner, no matter how distant it might be above his head. Meaning to say, even though it's not likely, it's not even possible for him to then tilt the Ner, but since the Chachamim made an Isser of Shemiyate, a person shall not read next to the light because maybe he will then tilt the Ner, they said lo plug. They said we don't make any distinctions, and therefore, no matter how high the flame might be, and how far off the possibility of him actually then tilting the Ner would be, nonetheless, it still remains osir. Says the Gemara, Chadhu de lo likri, hachtrei shapir dami. The Gemara says that if it's only one person, he cannot read next to the Ner, but if there are 2 together, they could read next to the Ner. Tanya asked the Gemara from a Brisa, lo echad v'lo shnayim. The Brisa says explicitly, not only 1, but even 2 cannot read next to the Ner. Omer Rabbi Elazar lo kashya. It's not a difficulty because kan be'inyan echad, kan be'shnei inyanim. When it's the same inyan that they're reading, so then 2 people can read together because one will remind the other not to be yata the Ner. Whereas if it's 2 different inyanim, each one is reading what he's reading and they're not paying attention to each other. Omer Rav Huna uvemedura afilu asara b'nei adam aser. Rav Huna adds that when it comes to a medura, a bonfire, even 10 people is going to be aser for them to read next to that bonfire. Because since the bonfire is large, so is many as there are, even if it's 10 people, they're going to be separate from one another and they won't be able to then remind each other not to then stoke the flames. Here it's different than a Ner, but the same idea applies that a person who is reading by it, when he sees that the flame is going down and that it's becoming dim, he's likely to then stoke the flames, whereby that would also be the Isser of Havara. So the same Isser would apply not to read next to such a fire. And Rav Huna's Mechadish does, even if it's going to be 10 people around the Medura. Omar Rava im Adam Chashuv hu mutter. If it's an Adam Chashuv, then it is mutter for him to read by the Or HaNer, because an Adam Chashuv does not typically, even during the week, tilt the flames, tilt the Ner. So therefore he wouldn't do so on Shabbos either. Over here we don't have the concept of lo plug like we said before, because we said before when it comes to, let's say, the Ner, which is even high, and it's not possible for somebody to get close to and tilt, nonetheless it's also because of lo plug, we don't make distinctions when the Chacham made their takana. Here it's different because here we're talking about not the object itself, the Ner, but rather we're talking about the individual, which is totally different. It's not included in their gezerah, and therefore, im adam chashuv hu, if it's an adam chashuv, then it's mutter for him to read next to the Ner. Meisvei asked the Gemara, lo yikra la'ar haner shemiyate. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha ani ekro v'lo ate. Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha was an adam chashuv, said, I will read, and I will not be ate, I will not tilt the flame, the Ner. One time it happened that he read next to the flame on Shabbos, and he wanted to then tilt it. Omar, he said, how great are the words of the Chachamim who already told us not to read by the Or HaNer. There's another version, Rabbi Nassim Omer, Kara Vihite. He did read by the Or HaNer. This was Elisha Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, vehita, and he then tilted it, v'kosav al pinkosa, and he wrote on his ledger, Ani Yishmael ben Elisha karisi vehitisi ner b'Shabbos, v'ksheyebona beis hamikdash avi chata shmeina. In other words, he was over in Isser Dirabonon, and not only was he over the Isser Dirabonon, but he ended up then being mate, whereby he was b'shoigeg chayiv, he was chayiv achatos, and he said, therefore, he wrote down when Beis Hamikdash comes, he let him bring the chatos. So we're left with the question because we see that even an Adam Choshuv, like Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, he was mate, or he was prepared to be mate according to the first version. So you see that an Adam Choshuv does sometimes tilt the flame. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Abba, Shiny Rabbi Yishmael ben Elisha, Hoyel mishum atzmoi, umesim atzmo al divrei Torah kehedyot. He is different because when it came to divrei Torah, he made himself like a hedyot, not like an Adam Choshuv, whereby he was even somebody who tilted flames in order to then read the divrei Torah so you can then understand what is written. Tani Chada, one brisa says, Shamish boydek koisois v'ka'aros lo'or haner. One brisa tells us that a shamish was able to then check and the koisois, the cups and the plates next to the or haner on Shabbos to make sure that they were not dirty. V'tanya idach lo yivdok. But another brisa says the opposite, that the shamish is not allowed to check. Answers the Gemara, lo kasho, kan b'shamish kavua, kan b'shamish she'ena kavua. The brisa that says that it's osur, even for a shamish to check the cups and the plates to determine whether they're dirty or not, is talking about a shamish kavua. Since he's a shamish kavua, he's a permanent shamish, therefore he has the ema of his master, the fear of his master, that the master sees that indeed the cups and the plates are not completely clean. He'll get upset at his shamish. So therefore it would be also because he would be liable to then, yes, tilt the flames to see better, to make sure that there's no dirt on these cups or on these plates. And the brisa is talking about a shamish she'eno kavua. Since he's only a temporary shamish, he doesn't have the same aim or the same fear, and therefore he's not apt to tilt the flame. The boys ema, or alternatively, ha v'ha b'shamish kavua. We can answer the stira and the brisos by saying we're both talking about a shamish that is kavua. It is a permanent shamish. If it's so, what is the brisa that says that he's allowed to do so? Says the Gemara, v'lokasha ha b'demishcha ha b'denafta. When it comes to an oil lamp, that is somebody who is osir, even if shamish kavua would be osir to do, because maybe he'll tilt it like we said before. But that which it says in the brisa that the shamish, even a shamish kavua can do so, he could be boydek, those cups and those plates, is because we're talking about neft. And since neft is a bad smelling type of fuel, he's not going to then tilt it, and there's no concern that will be done on Shabbos. Iboy lehu. Ask the Gemara the following question: Shamish she'enoi kavua. If it's a shamish that's not kavua, that we said before, could be boydek. But over here, b'demishcha mahu. If it's talking about oil, what would be the din? Could he go ahead and tilt? Can he go ahead and check the plates and the cups by mishcha when it comes to oil? Omarav halacha ve'ein morin kain. The halacha is indeed he could do so, but we do not give the ruling to others. Why? Because we don't want other people to then be mezalzel in this halacha, and therefore we don't teach it to others. But mi'ikir hadin, says Rav, the halacha is so that indeed he could be boydek things, kelim, next to the or haner. Rabbi Yirmiyahu bar Abba Omar halacha u'marin kain. Rabbi Yirmiyahu bar Abba argues and says the halacha is so, and he can even teach it to others. Rabbi Yirmiyahu bar Abba ikloi lebei Rav Asi. The Gemara tells that Rabbi Yirmiyahu bar Abba, he went to the house of Rav Asi. Kam shamei kabodik lenuhura deshraga. And the shamish of Rabbi Yirmiyahu bar Abba got up and he checked the kelim, the cups and the plates of the host, Rabbi Asi. Omra lei devisu. The wife of Rav Asi said to him, Umar lo ovid hochi. Is that indeed okay? After all, Rav Asi, you don't do that. Omar le shavke, leave him. Kerabe svirle, because his Rebbe, Rabbi Yirmiyahu bar Abba, does hold that indeed the halacha is that that Shamish is allowed to check the cups and the plates, even though we're dealing with oil. And since he was a Shamish Shelo Kavua in this case, because he was in the house of Rav Asi, it wasn't a problem.